Well, it is the question that is dominating the energy debate right now. Is nuclear risky, dangerous and toxic? That's our question for tonight's Head to Head.
Well, joining us for tonight's debate, Nationals MP Keith Pitt and New South Wales Greens Senator David Shoebridge. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Keith, I'll start with you. There's been a massive scare campaign over the last few days. Is nuclear power dangerous and toxic?
Well, it's not dangerous anywhere else. It's getting utilised around the world. It's obviously in nuclear submarines and ships that are powered by nuclear reactors in France and the UK and the United States and South Korea and the UAE, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And we've signed up for nuclear submarines. And we're going to continue to see this. We'll see a scare campaign. We'll see experts at 10 paces. We'll see companies firing off consultants left, right and centre on pricing. But Labor's proposition will fail with the Australian people on a very, very fundamental piece, and that's this. You can't run Australia on part-time power.
David Shoebridge, I mean, how does the argument stack up that nuclear is risky, dangerous and toxic when, as Keith Pitt just said, it's used in 32 countries around the world?
Well, I'm assuming Keith isn't the member for Chernobyl or Fukushima. And of course, if you're asking local residents in either of those places, they'd probably have a pretty different answer to what Keith gives. And of course, it's dangerous and toxic. We're talking about waste that is lethal for tens and tens of thousands of years that no country on the planet has actually got a solution for. But it's not just toxic to the environment. It's not just toxic to potentially local residents and those in a very wide surrounding region if something goes wrong. It's bloody well toxic for the budget. It's toxic for power bills, and it's toxic for the actual debate we need to have, which is how to keep coal and gas in the ground and how to move to the cheap, abundant, renewable energy source that this country, of all countries on the planet, should absolutely master.
Keith, what does it say when David's first statement about nuclear energy refers to an event from 1986? Is that not the kind of scare campaign and silly nonsense that we've had over the last few days?
Oh, well, I'll give you some that's a bit closer. The USS Ronald Reagan, which is run by nuclear reactors, was parked up in Brisbane, in the Brisbane River, not that long ago. The Labor government, the current one, has lifted the moratorium at Adelaide so that you can build nuclear submarines in Adelaide with reactors paid for with Australian taxpayers' dollars built in the UK. I mean, this is just nonsense. And if you want to look at things which are dangerous, if you look at solar panels, for example, they're full of heavy metals like cadmium. The current recovery rate is less than 20% on recycling. It's mostly just the glass and aluminium. And if we want to talk about a half-life, well, the blades on wind turbines are a carbon fibre composite and they last forever. And we will have 43 million tonne of blades alone by 2050. So I'd prefer to go to something which is very, very energy dense for the size. It's a very small footprint, very small impact on the environment. And I don't want to see thousands of hectares of actual koala habitat being bulldozed to put up wind turbines and solar panels, which is what's happening right now.
David Shoebridge, I mean, does he have a point? You're tearing up the land here for the renewables risky experiment.
I got to tell you, that is one of the most bizarre arguments I've ever heard, suggesting that recycled solar panels are more dangerous than high-grade nuclear waste produced out of a nuclear reactor would have to be one of the more bizarre arguments I've ever heard. And the fact that it's been given credibility by a politician from what's meant to be a serious party, I find astounding. So too is the idea that a serious political party in this country can launch a policy, apparently a nationally serious policy, to build 7 nuclear reactors without a costing, without even knowing what type of reactors they're going to be built. And then from a far-right party, and here on Sky News being cheered in, from a far-right party wanting a publicly owned monopoly on an uncosted set for 7 nuclear reactors, which will produce power at 5 or 6 times the cost of renewable energy. You couldn't make this stuff up. And they pretend they're a serious party, and we pretend this is a serious debate. The real debate is how to make the renewable energy revolution work. That's what we should be talking about.
David, you talk about a serious party, but I remember when the leader of your party, Adam Bant, talking about the nuclear subs, he described them as Chernobyls in the heart of Australia's cities. How do we take the Greens seriously when they use that kind of rhetoric about technology that is well advanced, well trusted, that we're bringing into our defence force, floating Chernobyls?
Well, the idea that the Labor Party, and I think we should be very clear, the Labor Party has partly brought this kind of toxic and pointless debate on itself by actually inviting in small nuclear reactors into our cities and into our harbours. And the Greens have been fundamentally opposed to the idea of having floating nuclear reactors in places like in my home state of Port Kembla. I can tell you now, the residents there don't want 5 floating nuclear reactors in their port. And you go to Port Adelaide, the residents there have not been asked about whether or not they want floating nuclear reactors. The idea that just because the Labor Party is doing something stupid in the form of AUKUS and inviting nuclear-powered submarines into the country, that somehow makes it a good idea to produce our own toxic waste and have our own toxic nuclear industry. Like, 2 of these dreadful decisions coming together does not make it right.
Keith, what's your response to that?
Well, I like David's admission. You have to make intermittent wind and solar work. Well, you can't make it work. It's weather dependent. That's why it's unreliable. I don't want this nation to rely on the weather as to whether we can turn the stove on, whether we can run an operating theatre, whether you get in the lift and you get stuck or not. It's a pretty straightforward proposition. And, David's making the point about half-life. Well, modern reactors can actually reprocess and reutilise their waste. And I'm just simply making the point, cadmium lasts forever. It's heavy metal. It's very, very bad for you. Carbon fibre will never break down, ever. It doesn't have a half-life. And if we look at the impact on Australia's environment, small footprint from nuclear, in my mind, is way better for the environment than covering millions of hectares, literally, which you have to clear and level for all of these solar panels made in China, which can be destroyed in a single hailstorm. I want our country to be strong. I want energy security for our nation. This is the proposition we will take to the Australian people at the next election, and I look forward to the debate.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to the debate too. It's going to be interesting. Keith Pitt, David Shoebridge, thanks so much for joining us tonight.